Someone asked Buddha, "Are we living in an illusion?" There's a passage in T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets where he raises an important question. Suppose you have a feeling of deep spiritual contentment, of oneness and connectedness with all the universe. To what extent is that feeling meaningful? Is it a sign that you've attained a heightened spiritual state? Are you in touch with some transcendent reality? Or is it simply a sign that you had a nice dinner and you feel rested, physically satisfied? This is an important question for people who want to read deep meanings into their feelings. They want to believe that their feelings constitute their true identity and that their feelings tell the truth. But feelings can lie. A warm sense of interconnectedness may indicate simply that your digestion is good and physically you're well provided for. One way of getting around that conundrum is to look not at what feelings really mean, but at what you can do with them. This is the Buddha's approach. As he points out, our feelings are fabricated. Although the happiness of Nibbana is not a feeling, every other form of happiness is a feeling, and every feeling is fabricated. This means that all feelings have an intentional element. We put them together for a certain purpose. We want a particular feeling if for nothing else than to establish who we are and what we want. There is a purpose, many times blind and unknown, that shapes what we feel. A study was made years back of facial expressions, showing how every common emotion is expressed with a certain set of facial expressions regardless of culture. Grief, contentment, happiness, and ridicule each have their own way of getting patterned in the muscles in your face, and this pattern holds across all human societies. The researchers working on this topic wanted to master all the different expressions. So one day, they were working on the expression for sadness. After trying to get all the muscles in the face together in expression of sadness, they found at the end of the day that they were sad. This shows that the emotion doesn't necessarily have to be real just because it's strong or pervasive. It may simply be a habit, a result of the way you carry your body, the way you compose your face. So, what do you do with the fact that feelings are fabricated? You learn how to fabricate them well. Instead of trying to dig down and see what your real feelings are, notice if you can create comfortable feelings in the body, good feelings, happy feelings through the way you hold your face, the way you hold your body, the way you breathe. This can cause feelings of pleasure, refreshment, and rapture to pervade the body. Admittedly, they're fabricated, but so are other feelings. The important point is that these feelings have their uses. If you can maintain these kinds of feeling, the mind is in a much better position to look at things from a calm, steady point of view. So when you run across a good feeling like this, whether it just happens or you can induce it, learn how to maintain it. This is part of the duty of the path, learning how to develop the factors of right concentration, the ease and well-being, even the sense of rapture that can come from the way you breathe, from the way you focus on the different elements in the body. Even uncomfortable feelings can have their uses. The Buddha gives an analysis of the different emotions that arise in people who are not on the path and in people who are. Take, for instance, what he calls householder grief, the grief of someone who's simply upset because he didn't get to see the sights, hear the sounds, smell the smells, taste the tastes, feel the tactile sensations, or think about the ideas he wanted to. He's disappointed in his aims. For most of us, our way of overcoming that particular kind of grief is to try to find those sights and sounds and so on, to make them happen so as to feel householder joy. But the problem with householder joy is that you can lose it very quickly, and then you're back into householder grief. Things go back and forth like this, and never really get anywhere. It's like throwing a stick up in the air. Sometimes it falls on this end, sometimes it falls on that end. There's no real rhyme or reason to this, and you never get out of the cycle. The Buddha's solution to this pattern is to substitute householder grief with renunciate grief. The grief that comes from realizing that there is a deathless, but you haven't attained it yet. Even though this may create an uncomfortable feeling in the mind, it points to a way out. It acknowledges that there is a deathless, there is an escape, that in and of itself offers hope, gives you a sense of direction. It induces you to work in that direction. That's why this form of grief is a useful emotion. Not every kind of grief or discomfort is bad. How many times have you heard people say that it's wise not to have any big goals in the practice because you'll get dissatisfied over the fact that you haven't reached your goal? You should just stay content with what you've got. That kind of attitude is like shooting an arrow without pulling the bow back and getting the string taut. The arrow's never going to fly anywhere. It just stays right where it is or drops on the ground at your feet where people can trample on it. There has to be a certain amount of tension in the practice, a certain sense that I don't yet have the true happiness I really want in life, a sense of samvega, a dismay with the way you're living your life, and a sense of urgency that you've got to find a way out. Only with that tension will the practice take flight. Samvega may be an unpleasant emotion, but you need it in order to spur yourself along the path, to do what needs to be done. The desire to be more generous, to be more virtuous, to be better at your meditation is not a bad desire. It's Shanda, one of the bases for success. So take that desire and act on it. Decide that this really is important. As you work on the path, you may feel deprived of this or that physical comfort, so you should remind yourself that that's not important. The important thing is that there's a deathless, and you haven't found it yet. And ultimately, this sense of renunciate grief yields renunciate joy. You use it to spur yourself on to actually develop more mindfulness, more concentration, more discernment. Then you can experience the joy of having mastered these skills and of ultimately gaining release. So, renunciate grief is a feeling with a purpose, and you can induce it. The fact that it's induced doesn't mean it's not real or that it's not your authentic self. After all, you know what the Buddha says about trying to find an authentic self in form and feeling and all the other aggregates. You're not going to find it, but you can find things you can use. You take those aggregates and turn them into the path. As you do this, your renunciate grief leads you to renunciate joy. You've got the breath, you've got all the elements in the body. How can you relate to them in a way that feels good? Explore the possibilities. Master them as a skill. When you can master this skill, it gives you a sense of well-being in the present moment that doesn't have to depend on conditions outside. You could sit here and think about all the reasons that would make you miserable being here. It's hot outside. You don't have the comforts you might enjoy if you were living at home, all the long lists of potential grievances. But what do those grievances accomplish? They don't go anywhere at all. But you can also focus on the fact that you've got a breath, you've got the different elements in the body. The sense of liquid, you can focus on how sticky and disgusting the liquid in your body is, or, for the time being, on the fact that liquid feelings in the body are cool. Focus on them so that you're not focusing on the heat. You could focus on the breath. What way is the breath light? Totally unstuck, totally unfettered. It has nothing to do with heat or coolness at all. It's simply motion, energy. Your mind tunes into that kind of sensation. You may find that you can start smiling, and then the smile on your face induces all the chemical reactions in the body that go along with smiling. You start feeling better. So try to induce feelings that are helpful. Focus not on the issue of whether they're real, but on the fact that you've got all kinds of potentials for pleasure or pain right here. What you are going to do with them. What use can you get out of them? What's the wisest thing to do with them? In this way, instead of getting waylaid by the fact that feelings are fabricated and questionable, you focus on the fact that you can fabricate them with discernment, with knowledge. As the Buddha points out, Fabricated feelings are often based on ignorance, which leads to suffering. But you can also fabricate them with the knowledge that leads to the end of suffering. So look at where you are on the path. Sometimes it requires focusing on the grief, focusing on the discomfort. There's a passage in the Sutta on Transcendent Dependent Co-arising that traces all the factors leading up to suffering, but then states that from suffering you can develop conviction, and through conviction you develop the path. From developing the path, you develop joy. This is the Buddha's analysis of how you go from householder grief, the fact you're not getting what you want, through renunciate grief to renunciate joy. Realize that there's a goal in here. There must be a way out of suffering, but you haven't found it yet. There may be a certain amount of grief around that, but you can work with that grief until it develops renunciate joy. And then you can use that renunciate joy to get further along the path. So these feelings have their uses. Focus on the fact that they're leading you somewhere, and you can choose the feelings that take you where you want to go. That way, you get the most out of them. Moving between thought worlds. We've all had the experience when we're asleep of finding ourselves in a dream, and, for a while, believing that what's happening in the dream is real. Then something alerts us that something is wrong with the dream, and finally, to the fact that we're dreaming. Usually that's enough for us to wake up, to pull out of the dream. That process is very similar to the way we create mental worlds and emotional states during our waking life, because our picture of the world around us is always partial. It's always stitched together out of bits and pieces of what we've encountered through the senses. We have a notion of what makes sense, and as long as it makes sense and seems to be real, we can stay stuck in that state of mind. Then something strikes us as incongruous, as not fitting in. We realize, oh, that was an imaginary world. That's when we pull out. But then we find ourselves in another world, which may be better and may not. The ability to recognize what's incongruous, what's wrong with a world, that's an important skill. Without it, we get stuck in states of mind, what the Buddha called Bhava, or becoming, where we can suffer very intensely. We focus on certain things in the world around us, certain ideas about who we are in that world, and everything else gets filtered through that particular picture. Other people's actions, for example, get filtered in this way, so that someone acting with perfectly good intentions may seem to be evil, sneaky, unreliable, or vice versa. They actually may be evil, sneaky, and unreliable, yet we see them as being perfectly reasonable, perfectly trustworthy. But because the mental world we inhabit has its own inner coherence, we think it's accurate and real. So we have to watch out for this. In a healthy mind, it's easy to switch from one world to another, to recognize the incongruities so that one state of becoming can actually pull you out of a less healthy state of becoming. There's a certain fluidity. And the fluidity comes from your mindfulness, your ability to remember that you take on different identities and inhabit different worlds, and some are more useful than others. Some are more beneficial, less stressful than others. If you're skillful, you can adopt whichever state of becoming seems to be the healthiest at that particular time, given what you want to do in those particular circumstances. The people with real problems are those who can't get out. They get stuck in a particular thought world and everything gets interpreted in its light. They can really do themselves a lot of damage because there's no porousness between the different states of becoming. There's no connection. Either you're in it or you're out of it. The different identities you take on, the different worlds you inhabit, seem to be very radically separate. Usually for people who are stuck in a very unhealthy state like that, their only hope seems to be some outside power. This is why so many programs dealing with addictions rely on the idea of an outside power. Addicts get stuck in a particular idea of who they are, the world they're in, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of. And given the definitions of their little worlds, they're helpless. They need somebody from outside to come in and straighten them out. This comes from getting thoroughly trapped in a very fixed sense of who they are. One of the purposes of the meditation is to get you out of the trap so that you realize you have many different identities, you inhabit different worlds, and they can best be used as tools, realizing that no world that you inhabit is totally real or a totally accurate idea of where you are, in terms of your surroundings outside or what's going on inside. William James made a lot of this point, that our idea of truth is pretty sketchy. How could you possibly know the total truth of the situation in which you're located? It would require a knowledge down to the subatomic particles and out to the edge of the universe, maybe even beyond the edge of the universe. That would be impossible. So to deal with possibilities, the mind lives by its sketches. Recognizing this fact is a useful step. This sketch that I'm living with, is it a useful sketch? Is it helpful? It may have certain true details here and there, but you have to realize that no idea of your surroundings is going to be a totally adequate representation of what those surroundings are. The best you can do is ask if your sketch is adequate to your needs, your healthy needs, and in particular to your desire to put an end to suffering. To learn how to pull yourself out of unhealthy worlds and into healthier ones first requires an understanding of how the mind creates these worlds, and then a development of the skills you need to move fluidly and beneficially between them. Both of these skills are developed in meditation. In other words, you get hands-on experience in creating worlds by trying to create a world of concentration right here, inhabiting your body, staying with your breath, having a focal point. This is what these worlds are built around, a focal point based on a desire. In this case, you take the breath as your focal point, and your desire is to stay there as continually as possible. To help carry out that desire, you want to learn how to evaluate the breath and your concentration to see how well you're doing. For some people, this particular part is also difficult because they're adept at making negative judgments about themselves and poor at making positive ones. They start berating themselves for not being good meditators, for being hopeless. This is why it's useful to think about all beings, as we do before we meditate every time. May all beings be happy. When you think seriously about all beings in the world, you realize that very few people out there really can get their minds concentrated or even want to try. The fact that you're trying is a step in the right direction right there. You can also think about all the people in the past who've meditated. It's not that everybody sat down and, as they say in Thailand, had it as easy as peeling a banana. Everybody has had to fight to get the mind to settle down. So if you find yourself having trouble, take heart that you're not the only one. Everybody has problems with the meditation at one point or another. Even the people who in this lifetime seem to be natural meditators. At some point in the past, they were sure to have had difficulties because meditation goes against the grain. So when you learn how to think in these ways, it's a lot easier to evaluate what you're doing objectively and not berate yourself when things go wrong. Look simply in terms of cause and effect, and take your idea of who you are out of the picture for the time being. Just focus on the mental states that can stay with the breath, notice what distracts them, and see if you can be quick in coming back to the breath. When you do come back, don't berate yourself for having left. Take pride in the fact that you've caught yourself and have pulled yourself back in line. When you come back, try to come back in a way that's deft, skillful. Reward yourself with an especially satisfying breath, one that feels really, really good deep down inside. That gives you practice in slipping back into a skillful state of mind from an unskillful one, and doing it skillfully. It also develops your mindfulness. Mindfulness is what creates the bridges between these different states. You remember that you were in one state and now you're in another, And the possibility of slipping back into another distracted state is always there, so you've got to keep on top of things, to be alert for any signs of the mind preparing to slip away. It has its tricks. It has its slight moment of blanking out, after which you wake up in another world. But if you can use mindfulness as a bridge across that blanking out, it's a lot easier to direct the mind from one state of becoming into another when you want to, and it's a lot easier to stay in a state of becoming when you want to stay. These are all very important skills because they also help in learning how to recognize when you're in an unhealthy state. You can ask yourself, is there suffering here? That's the incongruity. We create mind states in order to enjoy them, but if they make us suffer, they're out of line with their reason for being. Then you can ask, does there have to be this suffering? And part of the mind will say, yes, but you have to learn how to question it. That's your only escape, recognizing that the suffering isn't necessary. It is possible to be in another state of mind that's less stressful. Just because a strong feeling or thought arises in the mind doesn't mean that you have to go with it, or that the feeling is genuinely you. Remember that who you are has to be put into quotation marks. You can make a sense of who you are around anything, and there are many potentials available in any given moment. So just because there's a feeling there doesn't mean that it has to be the focal point of your sense of who you are, because many feelings that come into the mind are actually destructive. This is why meditation is such an important skill in keeping the mind healthy. The mindfulness allows you to recognize when you've slipped from one state of bhava or becoming to another, one sense of who you are to another, one sense of what's going on in the world to another. And it also helps you to remember good standards for judging a particular state of mind. Even though a state of mind may have some features that are very true, you can verify it by looking at things outside that yes, this situation really is difficult or whatever it is that you focused on, but then you can ask yourself, do you have to suffer around this? And the Buddha's answer is always, no, you don't have to suffer. If you're suffering around a particular situation, you're not approaching it in a skillful way. There are other ways to approach it. We always have the potential not to suffer if we look for it. So keep that in mind, and then learn how to use the skills of meditation to pull yourself out of an unskillful state and create a more skillful one in its place, one that's more beneficial, more useful, healthier. Some people will say that you're running away, but what are you running away from? You're running away from one created world into another created world, but a created world that's based on mindfulness and concentration, on your ability to discern the causes of suffering. That's a much more useful world. It has potential. It can eventually lead you away from suffering entirely. So, whenever you find yourself in a situation that seems really difficult and you're just spinning around and around and around, try to look for that point of incongruity. Something's wrong here. Something's not right. And what's wrong is that there's suffering that doesn't have to be. You can pull yourself out through that recognition, and you can use your mindfulness of the breath as your handle for getting out. Back when I was with Ajahn Fuang, some of his students would get themselves into really strange states of mind through their concentration, and the handle out was always, where is your breath right now? Is it comfortable? That would gradually pull them into the world of the breath. In other words, they'd come to inhabit the body from within. In this way, you don't need an outside power. All you need is your own ability to recognize, there's something wrong here and I can get out. This something wrong is the fact something is creating a burden on the mind that doesn't have to be there. To get out, you don't need an outside power. You just need to remember that you have the ability to create a different sense of who you are and to create a different world to inhabit, one that's healthier. The ultimate goal of the practice, of course, is to be able to get out of all these worlds entirely. That's what it really means to wake up. But in the meantime, you can have your little awakening when you wake up in the middle of one of your created worlds and say, oh, this is suffering. It doesn't have to be here. and you look in the right place instead of placing the blame on other people in the past or in the present, the suffering doesn't come from them. The suffering comes from the way the mind thinks about things. It creates impossible situations and then burdens itself with them. It doesn't have to do that. Mindfulness, concentration, and discernment form the way out. And those aren't just vague abstractions. Mindfulness is the ability to remember what you're doing as you move from one state of mind to another. Alertness is the ability to see, I'm doing something that's causing suffering. And discernment is what sees that it doesn't have to be that way. There's an alternative. So as we're sitting here, we're gaining practice in precisely the skills we need in order to keep our sanity. Just start exploring some of the mind's possibilities in terms of the different identities it can take on and the different worlds it can inhabit. The meditation gives you a good, safe, healthy world to inhabit. Learn to appreciate this skill because it's your lifeline, and make the most of your opportunity to master it. Fabrication. The mind has a basic habit, which is to create things. In fact, when the Buddha describes causality, how experiences come about, he says that the power of creation, or Sankhara, the mental tendency to put things together, actually comes prior to our sensory experience. It's because the mind is actively putting things together, that it knows things. The problem is that most of its actions, most of its creations, come out of ignorance, so the kind of knowledge that comes from those creations can be misleading. For this reason, what you want to do in the process of meditation is to back up, to get down as close to this process of creation as you can, to see if there's a way to do it skillfully that leads to knowledge, that leads you to a point that breaks through ignorance. And that means, instead of building up a lot of things, you let things fall apart so you can get down to exactly where these basic forces in the mind are putting things together. Now, it so happens that when we bring the mind to the breath, we have all these basic forces right here in their most elemental forms. The breath is the factor that fashions the body. It's what they call kaya sankhara, or the physical putting together. The breath is what puts life together in the body. If it weren't for the breath here, things would start falling apart really fast. Then there's verbal fabrication, Sankhara, the act of putting things in words. The two basic verbal sankharas are directed thought and evaluation, and you've got those right here too. You direct your thoughts to the breath and then evaluate the breath. How does the breath feel? Does it feel good? If it does, stay with it. If it doesn't feel good, you can change it. This is about the most basic level of conversation you can have with yourself. Does this feel good or not? Comfortable or not? Yes. No. And then you work with that. What are you working with? You're working with mental fabrication, citta sankhara, which covers feeling and perception. Feelings of pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain. And then perceptions are the labels the mind gives to things. This is pleasant, this is painful, this is this, and that is that. When you've got the mind with the breath, you've got all of these things brought together. The feelings that come with the breath, the perceptions that label the breath. Now the breath is coming in, now the breath is going out, now the mind is like this, now it's like that. The directed thought and the evaluation are there as well, keeping you focused on the breath and on evaluating the breath. So these things are all together. If you stray away from here, you're usually straying away into distraction, into the realm of further elaboration, in which you lose this basic frame of reference and create a whole other one. It's what they call becoming in the text, when you create other worlds in the mind. Once you get into those other worlds, you lose touch with the process of creation. You lose touch with how becoming is brought together. So you've got to learn how to take those worlds of distraction and the processes that form them apart. The Buddha talks about various ways of dealing with distraction. Once you've realized you've left your original frame of reference, you bring yourself back. In other words, you remind yourself. In some cases, the simple act of reminding is enough to disperse that other little world you've created for yourself and come back to this one. Other times you have to reflect actively on the drawbacks of that other world, of the thinking that creates it, especially if it's thinking imbued with lust, aversion, delusion, or harmfulness. You've got to remind yourself, what would happen if I thought about this for a while? Well, you'd create certain habits in the mind, and once those habits are embedded in the mind, they lead to actions that can create all kinds of problems. When you see the drawbacks of that kind of thinking, you say, I don't need that. I've had enough of that in my life. You drop it and come back to the breath. Other times you can consciously ignore the distraction. A little world appears in your mind and you say, I don't want to enter into that. But for some reason it just doesn't go away. You realize the reason it's not going away is because you're paying attention to it. Even if you don't like it, paying attention to it is enough to keep it going, like a tar trap. You touch the tar with your hand and you get stuck. You try to pull yourself loose from the tar with the other hand, and you get both hands stuck. Pull yourself off with your foot gets stuck. Bite the tar, your mouth gets stuck. So the only way to deal with it is to not touch it. In other words, don't pay attention to it. You know it's there, but you just don't give it any mind. After a while, from lack of attention, it'll die away. A fourth way of pulling yourself back is to notice that when there's this process of creation, when there are these little worlds you create in your mind, an element of tension goes with them. Things would be a lot easier if you didn't create these worlds, if you just relax whatever physical and mental tension supports these things. So look for the tension. Once you can locate it, just relax it. When you relax the tension, the thought goes away. A fifth way, when none of these other methods work, is to tell yourself, okay, I'm going to clench my teeth, press my tongue against the palate, and I will not think about that other thing. In other words, just through the force of your will, you force it out of your mind. This is the method of last resort, the one that's the least precise and works only as long as your willpower lasts. But sometimes it's the only thing that will clear the air. If we were to compare these various methods to tools, this would be the sledgehammer. It may be crude, but you need one in your arsenal for cases when scalpels and X-Acto knives can't handle the job. So, when one of these other little worlds gets created in your mind, you use whichever of these methods work to let go of it and bring yourself back to the most basic levels of the process of creation: the breath, directed thought, evaluation, feelings, perceptions. Stay right on this level. What do you do with them on this level? Well, you can create levels of concentration in the mind. Concentration is a kind of creation, but it's a creation that instead of obscuring the process of what's going on in the mind, actually makes it clearer. You create, but without leaving these basic levels of your frame of reference. In other words, you put them to use in a new way. You put feelings to use in a new way. You learn how to create a feeling of pleasure from the breath so that the pleasure gets more and more intense, more and more solid. Just the act of sitting here breathing gets really refreshing. And if you stay with the feeling as a feeling, in and of itself, it doesn't pull you off into other mental worlds. You stay right here. It feels good right here. So instead of feeding on the pleasure in an aimless way, you do it in a systematic way. That way, you can keep the mind with a sense of pleasure, a sense of rapture, and it doesn't wander off. That's what the concentration is all about. As it strengthens the mind, it gives direction to the mind. It takes the desire for pleasure and puts it to good use. Once the mind feels comfortable in the present moment, it's not going to wander off anyplace else. It feels good right here. A lot more satisfaction comes from the sense of ease right here than from the little bits and pieces of satisfaction coming from the other worlds you can create with your mind. Again, this is a process of creation, but it's a lot more skillful than normal. It keeps things on a basic level where you're in touch with the process. You don't lose sight of it. It's like the difference between sitting out in an audience watching a play and being behind the stage. Behind the stage, you see the actual play, but you also see what goes on behind it. In that way, you're a lot less likely to get carried away by the illusion of the play. Now, of course, pain is going to come into your meditation as well. Sometimes it's out-and-out pain. Other times it's more subtle. And again, as with the pleasure, instead of thinking that you're on the receiving end of the pain, a victim of the pain, you start putting it to use. The pain is there for you to comprehend. That's what the Buddha said in his teachings on the Four Noble Truths. The task with regard to pain is to comprehend it. Once the mind is solid enough and stable enough so as not to feel threatened by the pain, it can analyze the pain on whatever level it may be, searing pain or more subtle stress. As you comprehend the pain, you start finding that you understand the mind a lot better too. All the little animals in the mind that tend to gather around pain, you begin to notice who they are, what they are, and you realize, that's not me. It's just these thoughts that tend to cluster around pain. Gee, if you want to identify with them, you can, but they're going to turn your mind into a menagerie. They're going to create a lot of turmoil, and so you learn how to let them go. Even when you're focused on the pleasant levels of concentration, you'll find that as you get more and more sensitive toward these various levels, a subtle element of stress accompanies each one of them. Once you identify where that stress is, you let it go. That takes you to a more subtle level of concentration. You stay there for a while. In the beginning, you don't notice the stress in the new level. It's like going into a bright room where your eyes haven't yet adjusted to the light. At first, you see nothing but the dazzle. But if you stay there for long enough, your eyes begin to adjust, and you begin to notice, oh, there are shapes, there are forms, there are things in this room that you can see. It's the same as you go from one level of concentration to the next. Take the stress of directed thought and evaluation, for instance. Once the breath really feels full, really feels satisfying, you don't need to keep evaluating it. You don't have to keep reminding yourself to stay with it. You're just there with a basic perception. You let go of the directed thought and evaluation, and bong, you come down to a much deeper level. You go through this step by step. You realize what an important role perceptions play in this, the labels you put on things. You're constantly labeling the breath. When the breath is still so that you can drop that label, you begin to label the sense of space that's left, then the sense of knowing that's left as you drop the label for space, then all the way up to the sphere of nothingness. That's still called a perception attainment. It's based on the label that the mind puts on the experience that keeps you there. So again, you're with these very basic levels of creation in the mind. When you start taking them apart, that's when things really get interesting. Instead of building up, you're letting go, bit by bit. And then, of course, you're getting attached to the new level you reach. But it's a good attachment. Otherwise, you'd go floating off to other worlds. This attachment here, at least, keeps you in the present moment where things can begin to open up. And instead of elaborating on it, you keep applying the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and keep the questions basic. Where is the stress here? This is especially important when you get to the level of infinitude of consciousness or the infinitude of space. On those levels, it's easy to develop a sense that you've reached the ground of being from which all things come and to which all things return. If you're not careful, you can really start philosophizing on this theme, elaborating on it, getting into all kinds of abstractions about the relationship between the absolute and the relative, emanation, all sorts of big buzzword issues. but they're totally irrelevant to the real problem in the mind, that there's still stress here. If you're still stuck here, you haven't gone beyond. You haven't reached the deathless. You've got to keep asking that same old basic question. Where is there stress here? Look for it. See what you're doing that keeps the stress going. See that it's unnecessary, and then let go. Ultimately, you open up to something totally unfabricated. So instead of building things up that pull you away from the present, you start by building up states of concentration in the mind. These are types of fabrication, of course, but they're the type of fabrication that keeps you within this frame of reference, the very absolute present. They don't distract you into other levels where you lose touch with the basic building blocks in the process of fabrication. This is a basic pattern throughout the Buddha's teachings. Before you let go of things, you first have to learn to do them skillfully, mindfully, with awareness. The doing, the mastering of the skill, is what enables you to know them. This brings us back to that basic principle we talked about earlier. We wouldn't know anything. There would be no awareness at all if there weren't any doing in the mind. You have to learn how to do things more and more skillfully until finally you can get to a level where the mind becomes too sensitive to do anything, and at that point it opens up to a totally different kind of awareness. So you make use of what you've got. The Buddha noticed that all things fabricated have an element of stress. But what are you going to do? How are you going to get to the unfabricated? You can't use the unfabricated as a tool because that would be fabricating it, and that's not its nature. You learn how to use the process of fabrication in a more skillful way. You divide things up into the Four Noble Truths. There's stress, the origination of stress, the cessation of stress, and the path. The path is a process of taking things that are stressful, these perceptions, these feelings, these processes of creation, and using them in a skillful way. So you use fabrication to undo fabrication, and then finally reach a point where everything opens up to the unfabricated. It's an extremely skillful path, a skillful approach. It takes the raw materials that we've got around us all the time, the activities that we ordinarily use to create experience, and teaches us how to use them in a more skillful way. Getting down to basics, keeping away from abstractions. Once there's an abstraction in the mind, there's a new level of being in there, a new frame of reference. It pulls you away from the present. A lot of self-delusion comes through abstraction. A lot of opportunity for lying to yourself comes through abstraction. So we keep things basic. We keep our nose to the ground. Just look at the basic things we have: physical, verbal, and mental fabrication. Learn how to put them to the proper use. Use them more and more skillfully. Get more and more in touch with the actual process of fabrication right here in the present moment. That's where things open up. The power of perception. There is a Pali word nimitta, which is often translated as sign, meaning a visual image that appears in your meditation, but that's not how it's used in the canon. In the canon, Sister Dhammadina said, and the Buddha confirmed what she said, that the four nimitta of right concentration are the four frames of reference or four establishings of mindfulness. Keeping track of the body in and of itself, keeping track of feelings in and of themselves, keeping track of the mind in and of itself, keeping track of mental qualities in and of themselves. Those are the targets of your meditation. Those are what you take as your theme. You maintain that theme by having a perception. As the Buddha said, that's how we get from the very beginning levels of concentration all the way up to the perception of nothing. You hold a label in your mind and apply it to what you're experiencing. The label can be a mental picture, a feeling, a word, or even just a kinetic sense that you have of the breath in the body. In other words, you might have a mental picture of how the breath goes into the body, or you may create a particular feeling through the breath. You can focus on a point someplace around the middle of the chest, and find a quality of feeling there that feels nice. You try to maintain that niceness, that pleasant feeling, so that nothing in the in-breath and nothing in the out-breath touches it or disturbs it. This is where the Buddha's image of holding a baby chick in your hand comes in handy. You gently hold that nice feeling all way through the in-breath and all the way through the out-breath, adjusting your breathing so that it doesn't disturb the feeling. Or you can just keep in mind the word breath, 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 as a way of reminding yourself not to leave the breath when something else comes up. Or the general feeling you have of the breath coursing through the body. That can be your perception, your mental label. But to stay with the breath, you need a label of some kind. It can be one of these, or something else. Your ability to keep that labeling in mind is where mindfulness comes in. At the same time, the label is what mindfulness needs as a sign to remember. That's how mindfulness works together with the perception. These two qualities of perception and mindfulness help each other along. As you get them more and more stable, you can stay more consistently with the breath. This gives you an important lesson: the power that perception has in shaping your experience. The English word perception is an awkward word to use because it has two very distinct meanings. One is just basically registering sense data, as in being able to register data at the senses. The other is the label you put on something, identifying something, such as perceiving a dog to be a dog. The second meaning is what's meant here. When there are feelings in the body, you can perceive them as breath feelings, or you can perceive them as solid feelings. Your choice of perception will have an effect on what you can actually do with those sensations. There are things you can do with breath sensations that you can't do with solid sensations. So perceiving them as breath sensations expands your range of possibilities. This is why it's useful to hold in mind the idea that whatever you're experiencing in your inner sense of the body is related to the breath, either the in and out breath or else the breath energy field that's more in the background. If you think of the body as being a solid lump, and you've got to pump the breath into it, that'll affect the way you breathe, affect the level of pleasure you can get out of the breath. It restricts a lot of your possibilities. But if you think of the whole body as a breath energy field, you can breathe in and out of various places that you might not have thought of before, breathing out of the sides of your rib cage, thinking of the breath coming in from the left and the right as you breathe in and going out the chest, you breathe out. Or you can breathe in and out of the shoulders, in and out of the eyes. See if there's some place in the body that you've never thought of as breath before and experiment with it. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy coming in right there. You don't have to pull it from anywhere else. It just comes straight in through the skin. Notice which parts of the body, when you do this, have an especially good effect on how you experience the breathing, so that it feels more fulfilling, as opposed to struggling to get the breath in or to move the breath around. The breath energy is already there, and it's simply a matter of nourishing it, filling up a little bit. You may find that you have a tendency to over-define where the different parts of the body are, or over-define the edges of the breath, so loosen that up a bit. Think of the body as a field of energy, and the breath can move around in places you might thought of being impossible before. Now, you might say, what's all this playing around doing here? Aren't we supposed to be here just accepting things as they are? Well, part of learning about things as they are is beginning to realize that you're shaping a lot of what you thought was just as they are, just a given in your experience. If everything were already given, already determined, you'd really be hampered. You'd really be constricted. You'd have no effect on the present at all. But that's not the way things are. If you perceive things that way, you're going to miss out on a lot of what you're actually doing. A lot of mental actions are happening behind the scenes that you might be missing. Open up the mind to the idea that you're actually shaping things here. The best way to actually see that in action is to consciously work on shaping the way you perceive things, these labels, these images you hold in your mind as they relate to the breath. You begin to see in action what the Buddha was talking about, which is that if you're going to have an actual perception, an actual feeling of the form of the body, or the feeling tones of pleasure or pain, you have to fabricate them from the raw material coming from your past. These things exist in a potential form, coming in from your past karma, which places some limitations on the range of your choices. But to actually have a feeling, actually have a perception, requires an intention, a sankhara, a fabrication that occurs in the present moment. These aggregates the Buddha talks about are activities. There's an intentional element in them. Really, to accept what's going on doesn't mean just accepting them as a given. It means accepting the fact you've had a hand in shaping them. You want to see that in action. If you don't see that in action, you've got a huge blind spot here in the present moment. And it's not just a spot. It's an enormous field of blindness surrounding what you think is happening and which the mind is disguising from itself. The fact is, what's hidden by that field of blindness is precisely what you need to know to gain release. To work through that blind field, ask yourself, what perception are you holding in mind regarding the breath? When you breathe in, what do you think is happening? What image do you have? Whether it's a kinetic image, a visual image, or just a word. What would happen if you could change that image in a way that allows the breath to move in areas that have been restricted before? If you find a particular perception that helps you settle down more firmly with greater sense of well-being, solidity, and resilience here in the present moment, then use that perception as long as it's skillful. If you come across something that gets even better results, use that one too. Realize that, as a meditator, you should have lots of different tools at hand. There's no one right tool that you can use without having to evaluate it. You can't just put the mind through the meat grinder to get what you want out of the other end. There's no one guaranteed method that can do all the work. After all, do you have only one defilement? Do your defilements have only one trick, one strategy? They have lots of tricks, lots of strategies, and so you have to have the tricks and strategies to deal with whatever they come up with, which means that you need a wide range. One of the important tools you're going to need as you practice is learning how to use different perceptions to get the mind more firmly planted in the breath, to the point where everything settles down, the breath really stops, and there's just a feeling of solid energy that's not moving in any way, but feels sufficient in and of itself. That's when you can start playing with the perception around the form of the body. See what happens when you erase any perception of a boundary around the body. Replace the perception of body with a perception of space permeating throughout the atoms of the body. There are lots of things you can play with. From space, you can apply the perception of knowing. Mindfulness is what allows you to keep these perceptions in place. Mindfulness, combined with alertness and your determination not to let the perception budge. This is the only way we get to see the power of perception, by holding on to a perception for a long period of time. This is why we try to develop mindfulness as an important part of the practice, this ability to keep something in mind. Once you've got a good perception, just hold on to it and see where it goes. This is how you learn to master the various tools you need as a meditator, and you get insight into the process of perception, the process of fabrication. Your concentration practice begins to contain within it a lot of the lessons you're going to need for discernment. So try to be very conscious of the process of perception. What perceptions are you holding in mind right now? And what are they doing in terms of the breath, in terms of feelings? Do you like what they're doing, or are you not sure? If you're not sure, hold on to them for a while and see what happens. Then try a perception that turns the first one inside out, and hold on to that one for a while. The only way you're going to learn how to meditate is to experiment like this. Because after all, we're here to see something we've never seen before, to attain something we've never attained before. That means doing things you've never done before. And the doing, of course, is the doing that's going on in the mind. Right here is one way of getting more and more sensitive to that doing, by working with these perceptions and seeing what they do, and developing sensitivity to know where you're doing something well or something not, something helpful or something not. If you bring the attitude that you're here to learn, then you can learn something new each time you meditate, each time you breathe. The varieties of fabricated experience. The term fabrication, Sankhara, refers both to intentional actions, mental or physical, as well as to the mental or physical conditions they shape. You can recognize something as fabricated when you can discern three characteristics in its behavior: its arising, its passing away, and its alteration while staying. Anything where the three opposite characteristics can be discerned, no arising, no passing away, and no alteration while staying, counts as unfabricated, AN 347-48. This right here is one of the Buddha's most radical premises. If every change you experience comes from fabrication, then you're fabricating your experience in ways you don't even realize. All that's experienced in dependence on the six senses, the five physical senses plus the mind as the sixth, counts as fabrication, intentional actions and their results. This gives some idea of how subtle the goal will be, for it will have to lie totally outside of the six senses. It also indicates how important it is, in the course of the path, to become sensitive to the intentional actions that constitute fabrication. Otherwise, it's easy to fall into the pitfall of not detecting your intentions, and so to mistake something fabricated for something that's not. The Buddha mentions fabrication in many different contexts, but two main frameworks dominate his analyses. One in terms of the five aggregates of form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness, and the other in terms of bodily, verbal, and mental fabrication. Both frameworks deal first with the truths of suffering and its causes, but they also play a role in developing concentration, the heart of the path to the end of suffering. Here again, the Buddha shows his skill as a strategist. If you fabricate your experience under the influence of ignorance, your fabrications will have to lead to suffering. But if you fabricate with knowledge, they can form a path to suffering's end. And the best way to bring knowledge to the processes of fabrication is to shape them deliberately into a state of mind that is still enough and sensitive enough to allow you to detect even extremely refined and subtle fabrications. That's what the practice of concentration is for. From there, fabrications can be used to develop the insight that leads to dispassion even for concentration, and ultimately, even for the fabrications of insight itself. That's when the mind is truly freed. The five aggregates. The analysis into five aggregates comes primarily in the context of the First Noble Truth, where the Buddha's short analysis of suffering is the five clinging aggregates. The act of clinging to any of the five aggregates or any combination of the five. This context can be broken down into two main subcontexts: discussions of how the mind interprets and elaborates on sensory experience in general, and discussions of how the mind creates one of the primary elements of becoming, its sense of self-identity. The five aggregates can be defined as follows. Form. Any physical phenomenon, although the Buddha's focus here is less on the physical object in itself and more on the experience of the object. Feeling. Feeling tones of pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain. Perception. The act of recognizing, mentally labeling, and identifying physical or mental phenomena. Fabrication. The intentional shaping of physical or mental phenomena. Consciousness. Awareness at the six senses. There's something of an anomaly here in that the term fabrication covers all 5 aggregates and yet is listed as one of the 5. The following passage helps to explain why. Its terminology is a little strange, but one point is clear. The mental act of fabrication shapes the actual experience of all physical and mental phenomena in the aggregates for a purpose. And why do you call them fabrications? Because they fabricate fabricated things, thus they are called fabrications. What do they fabricate as a fabricated thing? For the sake of formness, they fabricate form as a fabricated thing. For the sake of feelingness, they fabricate feeling as a fabricated thing. For the sake of perceptionhood. For the sake of fabricationhood. For the sake of consciousnesshood, they fabricate consciousness as a fabricated thing. Because they fabricate fabricated things, they are called fabrications. SN 2279. This passage suggests that the act of fabrication is presented with potentials for any of the aggregates made available by past actions, and it acts for the sake of turning those potentials into the actual experience of those aggregates in the present. Fabrication, as a name for one of the aggregates, refers specifically to this mental process. As a term for all 5 aggregates, fabrication covers both the processes of fabrication and the fabricated aggregates, physical and mental, that result. The purposeful role of fabrication is also clear in another passage that defines it in relation to the 6 sense media. This passage occurs in the larger context of a discussion defining all 5 aggregates. And what are fabrications? These 6 classes of intention: intention with regard to forms, intention with regard to sounds, intention with regard to smells, intention with regard to tastes, intention with regard to tactile sensations, intention with regard to ideas. These are called fabrications. SN 2256. So, putting these 2 definitions together, we can say that fabrication, as the 4th aggregate, provides the intentional, purposeful element in all the aggregates. Here it's important to note that aggregates are not just products of past activities. They themselves are also ongoing activities in the present moment. SN 22.79 makes this point by defining the aggregates with verbs. Feelings are called feelings because they feel, perceptions are called perceptions because they perceive, and so on. Even form deforms. In the course of acting in these ways, all 5 aggregates make use of other fabrications to create and condition still other fabrications, and they themselves then get used by other fabrications for a similar purpose in an ongoing causal process. For instance, in the standard description of dependent co-arising, SN 12.2, fabrications and intentions, the 4th aggregate, arise prior to the experience of sensory contact. In another description of the same principle, they arise in dependence on sensory contact, MN 28. In this way, they both interpret and elaborate on sensory contacts already present to awareness, as well as playing a role in shaping the next experience of sensory contacts. A similar reciprocal relationship holds between aggregates and self-identity. On the one hand, self-identity can be built in any of 4 ways around any of the 5 aggregates. Visakha. But lady, how does self-identification view come about? Sister Dhammadina. There is the case, friend Visakha, where an uninstructed run-of-the-mill person who has no regard for noble ones is not well-versed or disciplined in their Dhamma, who has no regard for people of integrity, is not well-versed or disciplined in their Dhamma, assumes form to be the self, or the self as possessing form, or form as in the self, or the self as in form. He assumes feeling to be the self. He assumes perception to be the self. He assumes fabrications to be the self. He assumes consciousness to be the self, or the self as possessing consciousness, or consciousness as in the self, or the self as in consciousness. This is how self-identification view comes about, MN 44. Then, once any of these self-identity views are created around the aggregates, those views turn around and shape further aggregates. They do this by coloring the way in which sensory contact is received. From that reception, even more fabrications are brought into being. Thus, both this assumption and the understanding, I am, occur to him, an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person. And so it is with reference to the understanding I am that there is the appearance of the 5 faculties, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, the senses of vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Now there is the intellect, there are ideas, there is the property of ignorance. To an uninstructed run-of-the-mill person, touched by experience born of the contact of ignorance, there occur the thoughts, I am thus, I shall be, I shall not be, I shall be possessed of form, I shall be formless, I shall be percipient, conscious, I shall be non-percipient, or I shall be neither percipient nor non-percipient. SN 22:47. As this last passage shows, once there is a sense of self based on ignorance, it colors all sensory experience with questions about your current and future states of becoming. Thinking in these terms is how craving for becoming and non-becoming come about. The way out of this dilemma is first to learn how to master the processes of fabrication with knowledge. In this way, fabrications are brought out of the first noble truth into the fourth, as part of the path to the end of suffering. And here again, the analysis of fabrications under the framework of the aggregates plays a role. As AN 936 points out, once you have mastered any of the 4 jhanas, the stages of right concentration in the path to the end of suffering, you should learn to see that each jhana is composed of the 5 aggregates. For example, if the breath is your object of meditation, then the breath itself counts as form. The feelings of pleasure induced by being steadily alert to the breath count as feeling, the perceptions that anchor the mind on the breath count as perception, the intention to keep the breath in mind counts as fabrication, and awareness of all these processes counts as consciousness. By deliberately fashioning these fabrications into the non-sensual bliss of jhana, you're in a position not only to see how jhana is clearly a fabricated state, but also to pass judgment on your attachments to sensual pleasures. Non-sensual bliss is much more reliable and blameless than sensual pleasures can ever be. This ability to see the fact of fabrication along with the value of alternative fabrications prepares the mind for the activities of insight, a topic we will explore further below. But first, we have to see how the Buddha's alternative framework for analyzing fabrications into bodily, verbal, and mental fabrications also functions both to explain suffering and to act as part of the path to its end. The 3 fabrications. This is a framework that the Buddha mentions briefly in the context of dependent co-arising, SN 12:2, where bodily, verbal, and mental fabrication are said to be conditioned by ignorance and, in turn, act as a condition for consciousness. What is meant by these 3 terms, though, is not defined in that context. There are, however, 2 other contexts where the Buddha does explain them in detail. The first context is a description of the ways in which 3 types of karma, bodily, verbal, and mental, play a role in shaping future lifetimes. In this description, these types of fabrication are analyzed in terms of the levels of skill with which they are fabricated and the corresponding levels of the cosmos to which they lead. And what is karma that is dark with dark result? There is the case where a certain person fabricates an injurious bodily fabrication, fabricates an injurious verbal fabrication, fabricates an injurious mental fabrication. having fabricated an injurious bodily fabrication, having fabricated an injurious verbal fabrication, having fabricated an injurious mental fabrication, he rearises in an injurious world. On rearising in an injurious world, he is there touched by injurious contacts. Touched by injurious contacts, he experiences feelings that are exclusively painful, like those of the beings in hell. This is called kama, that is dark with dark result. And what is kama that is bright with bright result? There is the case where a certain person fabricates a non-injurious bodily fabrication, a non-injurious verbal fabrication, a non-injurious mental fabrication. He rearises in a non-injurious world. There he is touched by non-injurious contacts. He experiences feelings that are exclusively pleasant, like those of the beautiful black divas. This is called kama, that is bright with bright result. And what is kama that is dark and bright with dark and bright result? There is the case where a certain person fabricates a bodily fabrication that is injurious and non-injurious, a verbal fabrication that is injurious and non-injurious, a mental fabrication that is injurious and non-injurious. He rearises in an injurious and non-injurious world. There he is touched by injurious and non-injurious contacts. He experiences injurious and non-injurious feelings, pleasure mingled with pain, like those of human beings, some devas, and some beings in the lower realms. This is called kama, that is dark and bright with dark and bright result. And 4237. An alternative way of rating these sorts of fabrication classifies them as to whether they lead to pleasure, pain, or to the imperturbable levels of concentration, the fourth jhana, and the formless dimensions of the infinitude of space or of consciousness, which can lead to rebirth on imperturbable levels of becoming. If a person immersed in ignorance fabricates a meritorious fabrication, her consciousness goes on to merit. If she fabricates a demeritorious fabrication, her consciousness goes on to demerit. If she fabricates an imperturbable fabrication, her consciousness goes on to the imperturbable. SN 1251. Because future lives will entail birth, illness, and death, and in most cases, aging as well. These discussions of the three fabrications place them firmly under the first and second noble truths, suffering and its origination. The second context in which the Buddha gives detailed explanation for bodily, verbal, and mental fabrication is in describing the factors that go into the levels of right concentration, i.e., part of the fourth noble truth, the path to the cessation of suffering. However, the definition of these three types of fabrication doesn't limit their application to the practice of concentration. Visakha. Now, lady, what are fabrications? Sister Dhammadinna. These three fabrications, friend Visakha, bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. Visakha. But what are bodily fabrications? What are verbal fabrications? What are mental fabrications? Sister Dhammadinna. In and out breaths are bodily fabrications. Directed thought and evaluation are verbal fabrications. Perceptions and feelings are mental fabrications. Visakha. But why are in and out breaths bodily fabrications? Why are directed thought and evaluation verbal fabrications? Why are perceptions and feelings mental fabrications? Sister Dhammadinna. In and out breaths are bodily. These are things tied up with the body. That's why in and out breaths are bodily fabrications. Having first directed one's thoughts and made an evaluation, one then breaks out into speech. That's why directed thought and evaluation are verbal fabrications. Perceptions and feelings are mental. These are things tied up with the mind. That's why perceptions and feelings are mental fabrications. MN 44. These definitions of the three fabrications apply to the experience of the body in all activities. as well as to the shaping of verbal and mental activity in general. After all bodily action has to start with the breath. All verbal action has to start with directed thought and evaluation. All mental action has to start with perception and feeling. This means that these definitions of the three fabrications can be applied to all activity and mental states. For instance, they are especially useful for understanding how to dismantle the component factors of unskillful emotions and creating more skillful emotions in their place. As with the 5 aggregates, the best way to comprehend the fact and value of these 3 types of fabrications is to employ them in the practice of right concentration. Here they are analyzed not so much in terms of how they shape a single level of concentration, but in terms of how they separate out when moving from one level of concentration to the next, higher one. Much as metals in a sample of ore will separate out when their melting points are reached as the ore is subjected to higher and higher temperatures. Visakha. But when a monk is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, which things cease first? Bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, or mental fabrications? Sister Dhammadina. When a monk is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, friend Visakha, verbal fabrications cease first, then bodily fabrications, then mental fabrications. MN 44. The following passage describes in more detail this progressive cessation of fabrications, and I have also taught the step-by-step cessation of fabrications. When one has attained the first jhana, speech has ceased. When one has attained the second jhana, directed thought and evaluation, verbal fabrications, have ceased. When one has attained the third jhana, rapture has ceased. When one has attained the fourth jhana, in and out breathing, bodily fabrication, has ceased. When one has attained the dimension of the infinitude of space, the perception of forms has ceased. When one has attained the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness, the perception of the dimension of the infinitude of space has ceased. When one has attained the dimension of nothingness, the perception of the dimension of the infinitude of consciousness has ceased. When one has attained the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, the perception of the dimension of nothingness has ceased. When one has attained the cessation of perception and feeling, mental fabrications have ceased. When a monk's effluents have ended, passion has ceased, aversion has ceased, delusion has ceased. SN 36-11. It has been argued that these 2 contexts for understanding the 3 types of fabrication, karma and rebirth on the one hand, and the practice of concentration on the other, are totally unrelated, but it's hard to see what is gained by placing walls between them. Instead, it's much more useful to explore their relationships. That will allow the insights gained into fabrication in the present moment in the course of meditation to provide further understanding of how karma acts on larger scales of time. Here it bears repeating. All bodily action has to start with the breath. All verbal action has to start with directed thought and evaluation. All mental action has to start with perception and feeling. Gaining sensitivity to the fact and value of these fabrications in the present moment, which the practice of concentration allows for, is precisely what allows the meditator to develop dispassion for even the most skillful levels of fabrication that lead to further becoming. It's in this way that developing the 4th noble truth gives insight into the fabrications that normally would fall under the first truth and the second.